Okay, so good morning, everybody. Thank you for the introduction, Ellie. So this morning, I'm going to be talking to you about mining in Cornwall and how that led to the creation of some unique wetland habitats and how those habitats flourished for decades, but then rapidly declined over the last 25 years or so. And I'll also be talking to you about how the Red River rescuers have played a huge part in the restoration of some of those important habitats. Okay, so where is the Red River? Well, this is West Cornwall. Down here you have Land's End. Over here you have the Lizard Peninsula. And hello. Yeah, so over here you have Truro, and then you have the wavy orange line, which I've shown here. That's the route of the river, and it starts at a little place called Beleno, heads north between Camborne and Redruth, and then finally over to the west and comes out into the bay at St Ives Bay around Gwithian and Godrevy. Sorry, wrong way. So this is the river, which is just under 8 miles long, and this is a 1978 photo of the river when mine waste was spilling into the bay 24/7, and it had done for hundreds of years. The iconic red color was from iron oxides, which the mines all discharged into the river. So many people will view Cornwall as some sort of chocolate box holiday destination with its romantic pole art landscapes, little fishing villages, quaint little engine houses dotted around. But until relatively recently, the reality was quite different. The mining industry in Cornwall was absolutely massive, so either tin, copper, or china clay. And this is the Red River Valley back in 1900, near the village of Bray, where I grew up. And you can see that there are engine houses and mine burrows stretching out for as far as the eye can see. And down here in the valley where the river was running, you can see some settling tanks, which are an important part of the story today. So this is the landscape that I grew up in. It didn't have all the roofs and things like that, but you could see the derelict walls and chimneys, and the ground cover was exactly like this. So the river corridor was almost entirely manipulated by mining, with the river itself becoming little more than a straightened drain, where all the mines discharge their tailings into the river. So a series of tin streaming works grew up along the river to recover some of that lost material, because the process of extracting tin by the mines was quite inefficient, and so there was always plenty of tin left in the discharge that was put into the river. So in the 1870s, there were over 40 tin streaming works along the river, reprocessing the waste that was inside the river itself. And during the 1880s, Cornwall's largest tin mine, Dolcoath, dressed 21,000 tons of black tin. In the same period, the combined tin streaming works on the Red River that were dealing with reprocessing the waste produced 14,000 tons of tin, which sold for over £500,000, which is a massive economic benefit to those little setups that all along the river. It's huge at the time. You think about £500,000 back in 1880. That's a lot of money. So this secondary process was very dependent on water, with each site being a mosaic of water wheels, leats, header tanks, settling tanks. And this is the tin streaming works at Tuckermill, which is the next sort of hamlet village down from Bray where I lived. And this tin streaming works survived until 1973, and I remember it quite well. Um, but by the mid 20th century, the industry in Cornwall was in sharp decline, and as the price of tin dropped, and this is the largest of the mines in Cornwall, Dulcoath, and it closed in the 1920s. And over the next few decades, one by one, most tin streaming sites were abandoned. So the landscape they left behind was frequently contaminated with heavy metals such as iron, zinc, copper, manganese, and arsenic, meaning that any form of vegetation took decades to become established. And this led to many unique and varied pioneering plants and animals persisting for far longer than they would normally, because natural succession was held back. The scarce blue-tailed damselfly was one of those species. It's often thought as being transient, but at Bell Lake Marsh along the Red River Valley, for instance, it was found in an old tin streaming site from at least 1964 until 1995. So um, just as an aside, on the day I took this photograph in June 2023, I collected 25 emerald damselfly exuvia and 57 emperor dragonfly exuvia from this site at Wheel Maid. It isn't the Red River Valley, but it's very similar to how it was. But if you look at the conditions, those sorts of numbers are amazing, I think. So as a child in the 60s and 70s, this was my playground and the landscape where dragonflies came into my life. And this is the village of Bray where I grew up, in the background there. And you can see some of the remains of the old tin streaming works at Bray Adit in the foreground. And as you can see, we even had a waterfall. Hopefully you can see that plume of water there. By the time this photograph was taken in 1983, the landscape was softened with gorse and heather. But it was here in the early 1970s that like my love affair with dragonflies started, and I found a dead female broad-bodied chaser near the top of that waterfall I was just showing you. And I remember taking it to school and keeping it in one of those wooden desks with a lift up lid. And it was keeping a dead bat company in there. A bit smelly, but there you go. So as a young adult, I became a dragonfly geek and started studying the ponds at Bray Adit, the site I've just shown you. Um, and as a budding draftsman, I produced this site plan of the settling tanks, which I would do for many sites in the years to come. But I also bought this dragonfly leaflet from the Worcestershire Wildlife Trust, and it had a reprint of Cynthia Longfield's key in it. And I used that key to identify 13 species of Odonata at the site, including breeding scarce blue-tailed damselflies. However, 13 species proved unlucky. Sadly, Medway Tin, a tin processing company that was still operating 200 meters upstream, wanted to create an access track through the middle of my ponds to get to some mining waste further down the valley and then recover it and reprocess it. I didn't want to stop them from doing that. I just wanted them to move their track 30 meters to the east and go around the pools. So we had a site meeting with the planning department and the councillors. But sadly, to me, it was clear that some of the councillors at the time were complete dinosaurs. I was dismissed as being a wet behind the ears 21-year-old. 50 jobs were mentioned, planning permission was granted, the ponds were needlessly destroyed, and the company went bankrupt before ever processing a single lorry load. I'd lost the I'd lost the battle, but I'd found a voice. So this was the unlucky 13th species referred to in the paper cutting that was on your screen just now, the four-spot chaser. And on a more positive note, I joined the BDS in May, June 1983. I also found that the rest of the valley that I knew so well was an absolute haven for dragonflies, with scarce bluetails thriving right across the derelict landscape. There are at least 10 sites along the valley that would have qualified as dragonfly key sites. And in Cornwall, that basically means sites with breeding populations of scarce bluetails or small red damselflies. But even as those sites were being documented, most of them were falling victim to ill-conceived landscaping schemes, bulldozed in tidy ups, because everybody wanted to change that old tin streaming landscape into a sort of bland, grassy, woody area. And there was a lot of public pressure, and towards the end of the 1990s, there was a complete lack of management on the sites when they needed them most. So in 1997, in my role as county recorder, I got some funding from the Environment Agency for 3 days of habitat management work, and that was carried out by the BTCV at Roscrogan Pool, Rosewarne Mill and Bell Lake Marsh. And that did have some positive short-term effects for those sites. But the decades of slow growth were over, and the pace of natural succession was accelerating. And just a couple of seasons of inactivity left us with a jungle on our hands. So this is the same spot that you might have noticed in the newspaper cutting, and this is how Roscrogan Pool looks now. So despite that, in 2002, 2003, there was some good news for the valley when the landowners, Kerrier District Council, which is now part of Cornwall Council, officially designated the area the Red River Valley Local Nature Reserve. So I've shown the course of the river on this Google image in orange, and the bit that's now a local nature reserve is outlined in red. So it starts over here at Great Wheel Seaton and goes all the way to the mouth of the river at Gwithian. Recording for the Dragonfly Key Sites project between 1988 and 1995 played a major part in the LNR designation. But after a few nice signs were put up with out-of-date information about species that were no longer where the signs were put up, there was no money for anything else, so no management, and sadly the valley deteriorated. So by 2012, I realized I'd taken my eye off completely off the Red River, and was shocked to find that many of the sites that I loved were in a terrible state. So I decided I had to do something about it before it was all lost. I met with Gavin Henderson, the countryside ranger for the owners Cornwall Council, and got permission to carry out some management work. I then arranged to meet my friend Joe Poland at Bell Lake Marsh, and this is Bell Lake Marsh, hoping to enlist her help. And as you can see, this is how overgrown the site was. So as we both stood there gazing at a little patch about 3 meters long where small red damselflies were just about hanging on, my pitch to Joe was simple. Either alone or together, we had to do something to save this site right now. And in that moment, the Red River Rescuers were born. So on Saturday, the 29th of September 2012, we held our first of what became monthly scrub bash sessions at Bell Lake Marsh, with tools borrowed from Cornwall Council. And amazingly, we had 22 volunteers helping us that day, including family, friends, work colleagues, wildlife contacts, and the day was a complete and utter success. So the first thing we had to do was free the marsh from its shroud of birch, willow, alder, gorse, all of which have their value, but the valley, the Red River Valley, is dominated by wet woodland scrub. So we cut and burnt the smaller brash, and created log piles with the larger timber. Um, we also limited the number of spots where we built bonfires over the years so that we didn't enrich multiple patches of soil. And like cattle, we poached the ground by constantly walking across it, opening up runnels across the marsh where keeled skimmers thrived. So once the site was cleared, we dug new scrapes in the drier areas, starting the sequence of natural succession again from scratch and mirroring the conditions that existed when the tin streaming sites were originally abandoned. Um, we were lucky to have various groups helping us for midweek sessions, as well as our weekend sessions. So we had students from Falmouth University, Cornwall Wildlife Trust volunteers, Cornwall Council team building days, local companies having volunteering days. Scout groups have joined us as well, all of which has been an enormous help. Um, so this is that same scrape, um, and you can see if you look carefully at the back of that pool, there's a dark strip just above the water. That's the very shallow peaty layer of plant material that's helped, or not helped, it's made the vegetation take off along the river valley. So that below that is all tailings. So you just have this two inches of fertile peaty material that's promoting all this massive growth that's happening now. So part of the idea is that we try and get back to how things were when there was no PT layer. But you can see that as soon as we've dug a pond into the old tailings, you get this red effect back covering the pool, but it quickly settles down, and a whole host of open water dragonflies and damselflies move in. And in the first year that scrape was dug, it attracted the 17th species to Bell Lake Marsh, which was the blacktail skimmer. And the main marsh is one of the best sites in Cornwall for keeled skimmers, something that the nationally scarce spider, Arianus angulatus, takes full advantage of. So in our second year, I managed to secure a sizable donation from the company that I work for to allow us to buy 20 sets of loppers and bow saws. And this was the first of a number of grants that we've secured over the years to keep us in tools and PPE. This is one of our long-standing members, Gary Barlow, collecting the tools from a local hardware store. We've been very hot on health and safety with briefings before each of our monthly sessions, making sure everyone has gloves, safety glasses, and in recent times, high-vis vests. Um, this is our most recent scrape that we've been digging over the last year or so at Bell Lake Marsh. It's open, shallow, has a silty bottom. There are small patches of bulbous rush coming into it, and we had common darters laying eggs in it as we were digging it. Um, but I'm hoping that this one will be the one that brings scarce bluetails back to Bell Lake Marsh. When there are a lot of new people at one of our scrub bashing sessions, I give a brief talk about why it's important that we're carrying out the work and what species might benefit, and that really engages people and makes the whole experience that much better. So the BDS State of Dragonflies 2021 report found that 5 of the 46 resident or regular migrant species in the UK are in decline. 4 out of 5 of those species occur along the Red River Valley. 2 of those 4 species are near threatened or nationally scarce. So the overall national decline of those 4 Odonata species is mirrored along the Red River Valley. And so the emerald damselfly was resident at 6 sites along the valley during the period 1982 to 1994, but it's now only breeding in small numbers at Great Wheel Seaton, and that is a loss of 83.4%, which is huge. The common hawker was resident at 9 sites along the valley during the same period, but it's now only breeding in small numbers at Great Wheel Seaton and only occasionally seen at Bell Lake Marsh, and that's a loss of at least 77.8%. The small red damselfly was resident at 4 sites along the valley during the same period, but it's now only breeding at Great Wheel Seaton and Bell Lake Marsh. But it is increasing at both and doing extremely well. However, that's still a loss of 50%. The scarce blue-tailed damselfly was resident at 9 sites along the valley during the same period, but it's now only breeding at Great Wheel Seaton, where it continues to thrive, and the population's doing extremely well. But that is a loss of 88.9%. So these losses are probably mirrored in other old tin streaming valleys in Cornwall, as natural succession just turns them into jungles. So the work we are doing to protect and enhance the populations within the valley is absolutely vital. But there's always some good news along the way as well. The old key site at Rosewarren Mill in the valley that lost its small red damselflies because of the march of reed mace across the habitat has recently sprung us a surprise. Small red-eyed damselflies were found at the site for the first time in 2022. And last year, we found some tenorol insects suggesting that Cornwall may well have its first breeding colony of the species. So this is a 1908 map of the tin streaming sites at Great Wheel Seaton. They're highlighted in yellow, and then up towards the top left, this is Roscrogan tin streaming site. And the rest over here on the right is some processing areas for the East Pool mine. And this is how that same area looked at the same time on the ground. Right in the foreground here, you can see one of the settling tanks at Great Wheel Seaton, and then just beyond that is the Red River. Many of the features that you can see here survived in a derelict state right up until 1975, when the A30 dual carriageway was built. And sadly, at that time, the majority of the site was flattened, but miraculously the settling tanks at Great Wheel Seaton were spared. Um, so this is how Great Wheel Seaton looked in 2010. Um, it's very much the same now, really. Um, so this is how it looked when a tin streaming site morphed into a Dragonfly key site. It's the most important site along the Red River Valley, and we hope that it will act as a reservoir for the threatened species that are there to recolonize the rest of the valley as we restore other sites in the future. Um, this is just inside the entrance to the site, which for safety reasons is locked because of that chimney in the background there. That's unstable apparently. And there's a mine shaft up on the bank. So the council, for safety reasons, keep it locked. But of course, I have a key. So looking back towards the entrance, the first area on the right is where scarce bluetails roost amongst the taller soft rush there. And just in front of that is an area of water that looks a bit scummy. So it's that white area you can see there. And that has an area of very low growing bulbous rush in it. And this is that same bulbous rush with the scarce blue-tailed damselfly emerging on it. And notice how close the exuvia is to the water surface. You know, it's all the adult is almost touching the water. So this is looking towards the midsection of the site. In the foreground, there's a very open sort of delta-like area of slow-flowing water spreading out over a silty bottom with sparse vegetation. It's really good for scarce bluetails. And it also seems to me that having nothing higher than low-growing ling along the immediate margins is important because scarce bluetails often roost there. This is that same delta area again from a higher viewpoint. I'm guessing the silt here is quite high in heavy metals as very little grows on that part of the site. The water is higher during the winter months, but this is pretty much how it looks for most of the summer. The site never dries out, by the way. It always keeps water even in the worst of the drought years. The open water there just in front of the first settling tank is good for the likes of emperor dragonfly and broad-bodied chasers. So this is the first of those settling tanks with deeper water, very little emergent vegetation, but it's a great spot for showing people things like common darters, emperors, broad-bodied chasers, southern hawkers emerging. And it's a really good little classroom for talking to people about exuvia, because you can see the exuvia clinging to the walls or the small amount of vegetation that's there. So it's really valuable for that. So this is the northern end of the site with 4 large settling tanks. The 2 on the right have more vegetation in them towards the far end, mostly soft rush, which is perfect for the increasingly big population of small reds that we have there, as well as emerald damselflies and common hawkers. And then just moving slightly to the right, you can see the flow of water in the foreground heading down into the settling tanks. And this open area amongst the horsetails is where keeled skimmers have their territories, and also the ubiquitous scarce bluetails. So hopefully you can see that there are lots of diverse wetland pockets in a relatively small site. They're also very linear sites as well. But as you can see, there's gorse and willow creeping in at the sides. So every year we spend at least one full day at Great Wheel Seaton cutting back all the regrowth of willow, alder, and gorse to try and keep it in perfect condition for the 16 resident species of Odonata we have there. So because of this, Great Wheel Seaton is thought to be one of the few semi-permanent sites for the scarce blue-tailed damselfly in the UK. The species has been present uh, at the site for at least 45 years. 50 adults were noted in 1979. In 2006, during a month-long mark and recapture study by Catherine Allen, 252 individual scarce bluetails were marked and released. And in total, 153 individuals were recaptured with no movement of greater than 150 meters recorded. So that suggests that scarce bluetails are very poor at dispersing and colonizing new sites. So that's why we are keen to try and cover some more sites with our habitat management work to try and create a series of stepping stone sites along the valley. And also looking at I-record records for Great Wheel Seaton, it seems to me that you're more likely to see scarce blue-tailed damselflies than any other species at the site at Great Wheel Seaton, which surprised me. So as a group, it's very important for us that the Red River rescuers enjoy the fruits of our labour and record the effects of our management work. So whether it's positive or negative effects. So we regularly hold meetings or bioblitzes to gather as much data as possible. And we bring in experts in different fields whenever we can. And this is a photo of one of 3 moth traps we had running during a 24-hour bioblitz at Bell Lake Marsh. And as you can see from this species list of flora and fauna, Bell Lake Marsh has quite an impressive list of species. So that chap you saw with the moth trap, he helped to boost our moth numbers to 155, 76 species of micromoth, and I never dreamt that we were sharing the marsh with 67 species of spiders. COVID hit our activities quite hard, as it did for many people, and the 4 sites we worked at suffered as a result. But we were very, very fortunate to be heavily involved with John Wedgwood Clark's poetry project, which was called The Red River, Listening to a Polluted River. And we featured heavily in the BBC4 documentary Cornwall's Red River that followed that project. Both of these things increased our public profile considerably coming out of COVID. So it energized our existing members, brought us in new volunteers to the valley, and it opened up new partnerships for us, such as the one we have with Cornish Metals. And they're a company that has ambitious plans to reopen Cornwall's last tin mine at South Crofty. But as a local, I see that as a good thing, and they have so far they've been very focused on being as environmentally aware as they can be. So we find ourselves as being consulted far more about local conservation matters. So to sum up, we were formed in the summer of 2012 to manage and enhance wildlife habitats along the Red River Valley. We are self-funding, we cover the costs of all our own tools and PPE. We've worked at 4 sites along the valley, Bell Lake Marsh, 2 at Keeve Mill and Great Wheel Seaton. We meet once a month from September through to March to have our monthly Saturday scrub bashing sessions. We hold midweek sessions when manpower becomes available. Our scrub bash attendance ranges from 10 to 20 volunteers. And there are 82 people on our mailing list, 184 people on our Facebook group. So we've passed our 10th anniversary in good shape, but we must keep going. Our volunteers are very passionate about the great work that we do. Our wildlife has responded dramatically, and our mental health has benefited significantly as well, which is very important. But most importantly of all, our reserves have a voice. You can find out more by joining us on a BDS field trip on Sunday, the 7th of July, or by visiting the Red River Rescuers website at www.redriverrescuers.weebly.com, or by reading my article about the reserve in the new spring edition of the BDS newsletter. So thank you for listening.